So Russia is known to be one of the largest and richest countries in the world. However, the looks can be deceiving. The real size of Russia's economy may not be as big as everyone thinks. This may mean that instead of being powerful and rich, Russia is poor and powerless. You'll be surprised to find out the actual size of the Russian economy. Let's start with some facts. And right off the bat, it may surprise you, but the largest country in the world has a pretty small economy. The Russian economy is officially almost 14 times smaller than the American. In 2015, the GDP of an entire Russia was somewhere around half of the one California had. When it comes to economic might, Russia doesn't even crack the top 10 in the world. Its vast size suggests the enormous economy, but the majority of that space is just an empty, cold wilderness. The population of Russia is also pretty small, especially if you look at its size at only 146 million people. It's less than Brazil, Nigeria, Indonesia, and Bangladesh, as the economy directly depends on the size of labor and capital. The more of one or both, with all else being equal. The greater the GDP, plus the economy since 2014 has been somewhat crippled, with GDP falling by 40% after the sharp drop in oil prices. For comparison, the whole Great Depression has caused the American economy to fall only by 15%. Even today, with the oil prices back to pre-2014 numbers, Russia's GDP is still smaller than it was in 2013. Russia's economy, like that of the USSR before it, relies heavily on commodity exports, especially oil and gas, to fund government programs. Thus, about 39% of Russia's gross domestic product, GDP, and 60% of its export depends on oil and gas. This makes the economy extremely susceptible to any changes in oil and gas prices or in demand for those raw materials. To understand the real size of Russia's economy, we need to cover one thing: the deception and lies. All the somewhat accurate data available comes from official Russian agencies. And Russia, despite claiming to be democratic, in reality is totally numbered, released by the Kremlin, have long been held to be largely not always credible, but there are certain problems. First, latest economics release done by the Kremlin are extremely well cherry-picked. They are partial and incomplete, with unfavorable metrics being simply tossed out. The Russian government has withheld many key statistics crucial to calculating or estimating the real size and state of the economy. This includes state related to exports and imports, oil and gas output data, commodity export quantities, capital inflows and outflows, financial statements of big companies, etc. Even those favorable statistics that have been released are dubious, given the political pressure the Kremlin has exerted to corrupt statistical integrity. So if the official data is complete fraud, how can we at least estimate the real size of GDP? That's where the satellite imagery comes to the rescue. In the past decade, economists have followed scientists and started studying night lights, realizing that they can help gauge economic growth, map poverty, analyze inequality, and tackle numerous questions otherwise impossible to answer, especially in places where data is lacking. In growing economies, more areas are lit up over time, and in contracting economies, more patches of land become dark. In 2017, Harris School of Public Policy in Chicago published an article by Luis Martinez titled "How Much Should We Trust the Dictator's GDP Estimates?" His study observed GDP figures and satellite data for 184 countries over 20 years up to 2013. Here's what Professor Martinez found. When we compare the more stable, credible democracies to the more authoritarian regimes, we're talking about something in a range of 30 to 35%. What that means, for instance, is that if the true growth rate is 1%, the authoritarian regime will report growth rate of 1.3%. So let's calculate the realistic GDP of Russia. If we look at a graph, we'll see how countries present their GDP growth. Free, democratic countries show realistic GDP since the democracy and free media allow for easy checkup of all the data. If the officials report fraudulent numbers, in a couple of hours a respected statistical bureau will come up with the real numbers, which will definitely damage the politicians' reputations. In autocratic countries, however, any number can be changed to wherever whenever the ruler deems necessary. Now, back to the graph. As we can clearly see, Russia has reported a staggering 275%-ish growth in GDP since 2002. However, if we look at estimate growth by analyzing the satellite imagery, we'll see that it should be only about 120%. So in 2002, the GDP of Russia was $345.5 billion, and realistically, it's somewhere between $776 to $900 billion. Russian authorities, on the other hand, have aggressively pushed the idea of that the GDP being around $1.7 trillion in 2021. Even if we say that the real GDP is around $1 trillion, the official numbers will be almost 40% higher. That's an outrageous exaggerating, and the number fits perfectly inside the 30 to 35% threshold mentioned by Professor Martinez. So what does it mean for America, Europe, and Russia itself? Such a bad state of the Russia economy is great news for America. What does it mean for America, Europe, and Russia itself? Such a bad state of Russian economy is great news for America. With a small failing economy, Russia cannot be considered such a big economical threat, and the upcoming failure of that economy can lead to negotiating favorable terms or lifting sanctions, easing the tension, etc. This may lead to a huge financial victory and another boost of America's economic growth. Plus, with a failing or failed economy acquiring the valuable assets like mining companies, oil and gas development companies becomes cheaper. This means that if the Russian economy fails eventually, America will be able to buy a huge chunk of the planet's natural resources for cheap. For Europe, the outcomes are similarly favorable, almost guaranteeing securing key assets. However, for the Russian people, such a state of their economy can't mean any good. Salaries will keep going down, education will keep getting worse, and the overall quality of life will deteriorate. Plus, when economies fail, the elections are won by the loudest, not the smartest, which may lead to increasing political tensions between Russia and the West. As you can see, the Russian economy is not in the best state, poorly managed, not diversified, completely reliant on an export of natural resources. That doesn't sound so good. What do you think? Is Russia nearing its demise? Write your thoughts and opinions in the comments below. Hit that like button if you enjoyed this video or learned something new. Also, subscribe to the channel to never miss our new videos. Thank you for watching and see you soon. Bye.